Hi everyone! Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The moon, a bloated pearl in the velvet sky, cast a deceptive shimmer over the annual harvest festival. Laughter, music, and the earthy scent of roasting meat mingled in the crisp autumn air. For most, it was a night of joyous celebration, a brief respite from the ever-present undercurrent of pack politics and territorial skirmishes. For her, however, it was an opportunity, a chance to finally bring the self-important alpha down a peg. He stood by the central bonfire, a figure of effortless power and irritating arrogance. His dark hair, usually meticulously groomed, was slightly disheveled, framing a face that was undeniably handsome, but far too often marred by a condescending smirk. He was holding court, his deep voice carrying over the din, captivating the younger she-wolves with tales of his recent hunt. She watched him, a slow burn of resentment igniting in her chest. He was too sure of himself, too confident in his unshakable position. Someone needed to humble him. An idea, reckless and undeniably foolish, sparked in her mind. It was a prank, nothing more. A playful bite. A public display of defiance that would surely deflate his inflated ego. She envisioned the shock on his face, the stunned silence of the pack, and then the inevitable eruption of laughter. It would be glorious. She moved through the throng, a fleeting shadow, her gaze fixed on her target. The festival was a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and boisterous energy, but her focus narrowed, sharpening on the alpha. As she drew closer, she felt the hum of his power, a potent aura that usually instilled respect, even awe. Tonight, it merely fueled her audacity. He was momentarily distracted, turning to acknowledge a bowing elder. This was her chance. With a burst of unexpected speed, she closed the distance. Her teeth, sharper than any human's, but nowhere near the full length of a wolf's, grazed his bicep. It was a nip, a playful, yet firm assertion of her presence. She expected a startled yelp, perhaps a bewildered stare. Instead, a searing jolt, like lightning striking a brittle tree, shot through her. It wasn't the pain of his muscles tensing or the surprise of his reaction. It was something far deeper, an invasive current that ripped through her very essence. Her vision blurred, the festive lights fracturing into chaotic streaks. A guttural cry, not her own, tore from her throat. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest as if to staunch an invisible wound. The alpha, for his part, remained still, his eyes wide, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The laughter died, replaced by a sudden, chilling silence. The music faltered, then ceased entirely. Every eye in the clearing was on them, a collective gasp hanging in the air. She felt it then, a crushing wave of despair, so profound and agonizing it stole her breath. It wasn't her despair. She knew that with an unsettling certainty. It was his, and it was amplified, magnified, tearing through her with a force that threatened to shatter her. Every buried sorrow, every unspoken regret, every simmering frustration that resided within him surged into her, raw and unfiltered. She choked, a sob escaping her lips, entirely unwarranted by her own emotions. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed to her knees, the vibrant colors of the festival fading to a dull, oppressive gray. A sharp, stinging pain erupted in her side, as if a fist had slammed into her ribs. She cried out, clutching herself, even though there was no physical injury. She looked up, her gaze instinctively drawn to the alpha. He, too, had clutched his side, a fleeting grimace distorting his features before he quickly masked it. A terrible, dawning realization solidified in her mind. This was no ordinary prank gone awry. This was something ancient, something binding. A curse. The very air around them crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tether that had snapped into place the moment her teeth touched his skin. She had bitten the alpha first, and now she was irrevocably, terrifyingly linked to him. In reverse. Every pain he felt she would feel tenfold. Every emotion he buried, she would live. His shadow, once merely a metaphor for his influence, was now a tangible, inescapable presence. And the most terrifying realization of all, if he died, so would she. Her life, her very existence, was now intertwined with the arrogant, infuriating alpha she had sought to humble. The joke had become a nightmare. The days that followed were a torturous blur of amplified sensations and bewildering emotions. The immediate aftermath of the festival bite had been chaotic. The pack elders, their faces etched with concern and a deep, unsettling understanding, had quickly intervened, separating the two, their hushed whispers filled with ancient lore and grim pronouncements. They had spoken of a rare, forgotten bond, a twisted reversal of the true mate pairing, triggered by an aggressive, unsolicited bite from the non-dominant wolf. She was confined to her den, a small, humble dwelling on the outskirts of the main pack compound. But confinement was a physical illusion. Her mind, her senses, were no longer hers alone. The alpha, she learned, was a stoic, private creature. He rarely displayed strong emotions, preferring to carry his burdens in silence. This, she discovered, was her personal hell. Every flicker of irritation, every suppressed pang of loneliness, every fleeting moment of anger or even mild discomfort that he experienced slammed into her with the force of a tidal wave. If he stubbed his toe, she felt as if her entire leg had been crushed. If he felt a flicker of annoyance at a pack member, she was consumed by a blinding rage. Her own emotions, once clear and distinct, became muddied, indistinguishable from the surge of his. She found herself weeping inexplicably, only to realize, hours later, that he had been in a particularly melancholic mood. She snapped at innocent pack members, her voice sharp with a frustration that wasn't hers, only to discover he had been dealing with a particularly intractable territorial dispute. The physical pain was worse. A dull ache in his shoulder became a searing agony in hers, radiating down her arm. A scratch on his hand, a mere inconvenience for him, felt like a gaping wound on her own. She bore the brunt of his training sessions, feeling every impact, every strained muscle, every jolt of exhaustion, as if she herself had endured the grueling workout. Her body became a canvas for his hidden afflictions, a constant reminder of their unwanted link. Sleep offered little respite. Her dreams were vivid, unsettling tapestries woven from his subconscious fears and desires. She saw glimpses of his past, fragmented memories of his childhood, of the responsibilities thrust upon him too young. She felt the weight of his leadership, the constant pressure to protect, to provide, to maintain order. These dreams were not her own, yet they felt intimately real, further blurring the lines of her own identity. She tried to fight it, to erect mental barriers, to push back against the tide of his feelings. But it was like trying to stop a river with her bare hands. The more she resisted, the more overwhelming the influx became. She found herself recoiling from touch, from sound, from even the simplest interactions, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of sensory input, much of which was not her own. Her once vibrant spirit dimmed. The quick wit, the mischievous glint in her eyes, were replaced by a haunted weariness. She barely ate, barely slept, her body a constant battleground. The pack, observing her rapid decline, spoke in hushed tones. Some pitied her, others viewed her with a superstitious fear. A few, particularly those who had secretly resented the Alpha's unwavering authority, whispered about divine retribution. One evening, unable to bear the relentless onslaught of his emotions, she sought out the lead elder, a wise old she-wolf named Elder Rhea, whose eyes held the wisdom of generations. Elder Rhea listened patiently, her gaze unwavering, as she poured out her torment. "It is a bond, child," Elder Rhea finally said, her voice raspy with age. "But a twisted one, a reflection, inverted. The Alpha's power is immense, and your bite, however playful, acted as a conduit. It pulled you into his current, but because it was unsolicited, it reversed the flow. Is there a way?" "To break it?" she pleaded, desperation raw in her voice. Elder Rhea sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. "Such bonds are ancient, woven into the very fabric of our kind. To break it would be to tear apart what has been joined, and that rarely ends well for either party. The legends speak of true mates whose bond, if severed, can lead to madness or death. This is an echo of that, but with a cruel twist. So I am to live like this, feeling his every pain, every hidden sorrow?" "You must learn to discern," Elder Rhea advised, her eyes softening. "To separate what is yours from what is his. It is a difficult path, but it is the only one. And perhaps, in time, you will find a way to temper the flow, to dull the edges of his pain." The thought was daunting, almost impossible. How could she separate herself from something so intimately woven into her being? But the elder's words, however bleak, offered a sliver of hope, a direction in the overwhelming chaos. She would have to learn to navigate this unwanted link, to find a way to survive within the Alpha's shadow. The alternative, she knew, was a slow, agonizing descent into madness, forever lost in the maelstrom of another's being. The Alpha, for his part, remained an enigma. He rarely sought her out, and when he did, his expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask. She felt his presence, a constant pressure at the edges of her awareness, a low hum beneath the surface of her own thoughts. But he offered no words of comfort, no acknowledgement of the torment she endured on his behalf. It was as if he refused to acknowledge the cursed link, perhaps hoping that by ignoring it, it would simply cease to exist. This stoicism, she found, was a double-edged sword. On one hand, his control over his emotions meant fewer overwhelming surges for her. On the other, the sheer effort he put into suppressing his feelings created a suffocating density, a constant, low-level thrum of unexpressed turmoil that she had to constantly contend with. One day, while walking near the training grounds, a sharp, searing pain erupted in her ankle. She gasped, stumbling, clutching at the invisible claw. Injury. She looked up, her gaze instinctively drawn to the Alpha, who was sparring with his beta. He faltered for a moment, a fleeting grimace on his face, before regaining his composure and continuing the fight. She felt the surge of his irritation at the momentary distraction, followed by a swift, brutal suppression of the pain. She, however, continued to hobble, the phantom agony throbbing relentlessly. It was infuriating. He could simply push through it, his formidable wolf strength allowing him to ignore discomfort. She, however, was left to suffer the magnified echo. Driven by a surge of uncharacteristic fury, fueled by the borrowed frustration she felt, she confronted him after his training. He was wiping sweat from his brow, his muscles still rippling from the exertion. "Do you even feel it?" she demanded, her voice tight with suppressed pain and anger. "Do you feel the echo of every little thing you do? Every stubbed toe, every strained muscle? Because I do. Tenfold." He stopped, his hand pausing mid-air. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers. For a moment, she saw something flicker within them, surprise. Perhaps a hint of something akin to guilt, quickly extinguished. "It is a burden we both bear," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You brought this upon yourself." The word stung, a cruel reminder of her foolish prank, but the arrogance in his tone, the complete lack of empathy, ignited a fresh wave of fury. "I brought it upon us," she corrected, her voice rising. "But you, Alpha, seem entirely unaffected. While I'm here, feeling like I'm being torn apart from the inside out every time you so much as clench your jaw." His jaw, she noticed, did clench then, a subtle tightening she could only perceive because she felt the accompanying surge of irritation in her own body. He took a step closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Do not mistake my composure for lack of feeling," he said, his voice low, a dangerous rumble. "My burdens are my own. I do not inflict them upon others, and I expect the same from you." "But you are inflicting them," she countered, a hysterical edge to her voice. "Every pain, every emotion, every repressed thought. It's all pouring into me. I don't know whose feelings are whose anymore." He stared at her then, a long, searching gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. For a fleeting moment, the carefully constructed mask slipped. She felt a profound weariness emanating from him, a deep-seated exhaustion that went beyond physical exertion, and beneath that, a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a grudging acknowledgement of her suffering. "I cannot undo what has been done," he finally said, his voice a fraction softer. "But perhaps we can find a way to navigate this, to mitigate the worst of it." It wasn't an apology, not by a long shot, but it was the closest thing to an olive branch she had received from him since the cursed bite. It was a glimmer of shared responsibility, a hint that he, too, was grappling with the unwanted link, however subtly. That evening, a dull ache started in her jaw. It quickly intensified, becoming a throbbing, relentless pain that radiated up into her temples. She knew instantly it wasn't her own. She could feel the Alpha's frustration, his concentration, the slight pressure behind his eyes. He was undoubtedly in a meeting, probably dealing with some tedious pack bureaucracy that always gave him a headache. She lay in her den, clutching her head, the amplified pain a torment. It was then that a desperate thought occurred to her. If she felt his pain, perhaps she could influence it, or at least influence her own reaction to it. She focused not on the pain itself, but on the underlying emotion she felt from him, weariness. She pictured a cool, soothing balm, a calming blue light, washing over that weariness. It was a foolish exercise, she knew, but she was desperate. To her astonishment, the throbbing in her jaw lessened, ever so slightly. It wasn't gone, but the unbearable edge had dulled, and she felt a subtle shift in his aura, a fleeting moment of what felt like a calming. It was a small victory, almost imperceptible, but it was a victory nonetheless. A sliver of control in a situation that had felt utterly hopeless. Perhaps, just perhaps, Elder Ria's words about discernment held more truth than she had initially believed. Perhaps she could learn to navigate this cursed bond, not just as a victim, but as an active participant. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since that fateful bite, a faint flicker of possibility ignited within her. The uneasy truce between them, established after her outburst, slowly began to evolve. It wasn't a friendship, certainly not yet. It was more like a forced, uncomfortable cohabitation within the confines of their shared existence. They avoided direct, prolonged contact, but a new, subtle communication began to emerge through the bond itself. She started to experiment, tentatively at first, with the idea of discernment. When a sudden sharp ache pierced her stomach, she would instinctively probe the link, searching for the originating source. Often she'd feel the alpha's subtle discomfort, a slight tension in his gut from a skipped meal or a particularly stressful meeting. Instead of allowing the pain to consume her, she would try to mentally visualize it, to acknowledge its presence, without internalizing it as her own. It was a slow, arduous process, akin to learning a new language, but with every small success, a sliver of her former self returned. Conversely, she found herself becoming acutely aware of the alpha's subtle shifts in mood. His irritation often manifested as a buzzing pressure behind her eyes. His rare moments of contentment, however fleeting, felt like a soothing warmth spreading through her chest. She began to anticipate his needs, not out of altruism, but out of self-preservation. If she sensed his hunger, she might subtly suggest to a nearby pack member that he hadn't eaten, hoping he would take the hint and alleviate her own gnawing emptiness. He, in turn, began to respond in subtle ways. One evening, she felt a profound wave of exhaustion wash over her, amplified to the point of incapacitation. It was so intense, she nearly collapsed. She knew it was his. The next morning, she learned he had spent the entire night tracking a rogue wolf that had encroached on their territory. When she saw him, his eyes were shadowed with fatigue. A few hours later, a small, carefully prepared meal, known to be her favorite, appeared outside her den. There was no note, no explanation, but she knew it was from him. He hadn't explicitly acknowledged her suffering, but he had responded to it in the only way he knew how, through action, a silent testament to his understanding of her amplified burden. The shared pains, however, remained the most immediate and intrusive aspect of their link. One afternoon, a sudden, blinding pain exploded in her head, as if 1,000 tiny hammers were relentlessly pounding against her skull. She crumpled to the ground, gasping, tears streaming from her eyes. The intensity was unprecedented. She clawed at her scalp, desperate for relief. Through the haze of agony, she felt his distress, a profound, gut-wrenching ache that dwarfed anything she had felt from him before. This wasn't mere irritation. It was a deep, searing grief. When the pain finally subsided enough for her to gather her bearings, she scrambled to the pack common area. There, a somber crowd had gathered. The alpha stood, his back to her, his shoulders hunched in a way she had never seen before. He was holding something small and lifeless in his hands. A bird. A swift, sleek creature that had likely flown into a window. Its neck snapped. He was mourning it. A tiny, insignificant bird. And she, in turn, had just experienced a migraine of epic proportions because of his silent grief. It was an absurdity that bordered on the tragic. Yet, watching him, a strange empathy stirred within her. For all his power, his stoicism, he felt deeply, even for the smallest of creatures, and she was forced to feel it alongside him. This incident marked a turning point. It wasn't just about surviving the link anymore. It was about understanding the man behind the alpha, the hidden depths beneath the impenetrable facade. The curse, in its twisted way, was forcing them into an intimacy neither had sought, a shared vulnerability that chipped away at the walls they had both meticulously built. She started to observe him more closely, not just through the filter of the bond, but with her own eyes. She noticed the slight furrow in his brow when he was deep in thought, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand when he was truly stressed, the way his gaze softened, just for a moment, when he looked at the younger pups in the pack. These observations, combined with the raw, unfiltered emotional data she received through the link, slowly began to paint a more complete, nuanced picture of the alpha. He wasn't just the arrogant leader she had pranked. He was burdened, isolated, and carried a profound sense of responsibility. And she, the unwitting recipient of his hidden self, was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to see him not as an enemy, but as a complex, vulnerable being, just like herself. The curse had forced open a door she never knew existed, revealing the intricate landscape of his inner world, a landscape she was now inextricably bound to explore. The thought was still daunting, but it no longer felt entirely hopeless. There was a faint, almost imperceptible thread of curiosity, of something akin to understanding, weaving its way through the persistent ache of their cursed connection. The unique nature of their bond, once a tightly guarded secret known only to the elders and a few close confidants, began to subtly ripple through the pack. It wasn't openly discussed, but whispers turned into knowing glances, and soon, a quiet reverence, tinged with apprehension, surrounded them. They were the alpha and the cursed one, bound by an invisible, painful tether. For the alpha, the impact was less outwardly visible, yet no less profound. He had always prided himself on his unwavering self-control, his ability to compartmentalize and carry his burdens silently. The link, however, was a constant, undeniable breach of that carefully constructed facade. He could feel her awareness of his pain, her involuntary reactions to his suppressed emotions. It was an unsettling vulnerability, a constant reminder that he was no longer entirely alone in his own mind. He found himself instinctively guarding his thoughts, trying to dull his own emotions, not just for his own sake, but for hers. If he felt a surge of anger, he would consciously try to channel it into physical exertion, rather than allowing it to fester and amplify within her. If he experienced a dull ache, he would focus on it, trying to contain it, to prevent the tenfold echo that would inevitably strike her. This constant mental discipline was draining, a silent battle fought within himself, unseen by the pack. One evening, during a patrol along the territory's edge, she felt a profound surge of anxiety emanating from him. It was a cold, gripping fear, laced with something sharp and predatory. She stumbled, her breath catching in her throat, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at him, his silhouette etched against the darkening sky, his senses undoubtedly scanning the perimeter. He seemed outwardly calm, his stance relaxed, but she knew the turmoil raging within him. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. He didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the dense forest ahead. "A scent. Old. A rogue." His voice was terse, but she felt the prickle of unease intensify within her. He was projecting his fear, consciously or unconsciously. And she was drowning in it. Can you not feel it so strongly?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's overwhelming." He finally turned, his eyes piercing through the dim light. A flicker of something, perhaps concern, crossed his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, a subtle shift in his aura. The wave of fear lessened, not entirely gone, but manageable. He was trying. He was actively trying to shield her, to lessen the burden of his own emotions. "Better?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, still shaken but grateful. "Thank you." This silent exchange, this shared understanding, became a new facet of their relationship. It wasn't always smooth. There were still days when she felt overwhelmed, still moments when his stoicism grated on her nerves. But there was also a growing fragile sense of interdependence, a shared burden that, paradoxically, began to forge an unexpected connection. The other pack members, sensing the shift, began to adjust their interactions with them. They learned to interpret her sudden winces or moments of quiet distress as indicators of the alpha's hidden struggles. They brought her remedies for phantom pains, offered quiet words of comfort when they sensed his melancholy, understanding that by aiding her, they were, in a way, aiding their leader. The pack, in its intuitive wisdom, recognized the symbiotic nature of their cursed bond. She, in turn, found herself gaining a deeper, almost instinctual understanding of pack dynamics. She could sense the underlying tensions, the simmering disagreements, the unspoken loyalties, all filtered through the alpha's constant vigilance. She became an unwitting conduit, a living barometer of the pack's collective well-being, reflecting its anxieties and its fleeting moments of triumph. Her own introspection deepened. The constant influx of his emotions forced her to examine her own, to truly understand where her feelings ended and his began. It was a brutal self-discovery, a stripping away of superficial layers, revealing the core of who she was, independent of the external noise. She learned to embrace moments of quiet solitude, to anchor herself in her own identity, lest she be completely subsumed by his. The curse, once a monstrous torment, was slowly, painstakingly, transforming into something else. It was still a burden, a constant reminder of her foolish prank, but it was also a unique window into the soul of another, a profound, if unwanted connection that was irrevocably changing both of them. She was no longer just the prankster, and he was no longer just the arrogant alpha. They were two beings intertwined, navigating a shared existence, learning to feel and to heal through the unexpected conduit of their cursed bond. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but the path was no longer completely dark. A dim, uncertain light had begun to flicker, illuminating the way forward. The nature of their bond, while providing an intimate, albeit unwanted, connection, also presented unforeseen challenges. The very fabric of pack life was built on hierarchies, on the alpha's unshakable authority. Yet, the curse subtly eroded that authority, revealing his vulnerabilities through her amplified reactions. While the pack had grown accustomed to her mirroring his pains, a deeper psychological struggle began to brew, affecting not only them but the entire social structure. Rumors began to circulate, hushed whispers of the alpha's weakness being mirrored and magnified in her. Some younger, ambitious wolves, eager to challenge his leadership, saw it as an opportunity. If the alpha was truly so susceptible to minor aches and hidden emotions that it crippled another wolf, then perhaps he wasn't as strong as they believed. She felt the insidious tendrils of doubt and ambition through the bond, amplified by her own anxieties. She sensed the alpha's growing frustration, his silent struggle against these nascent challenges to his authority. He was already carrying the weight of the pack now. He had to contend with the unsettling reality that his inner turmoil was being broadcast, however subtly, to those who sought to undermine him. One particularly tense evening during a pack meeting concerning a recent territorial dispute, a young, brash warrior challenged the alpha's strategy. He spoke with a veiled disrespect, his words laced with barely concealed defiance. She felt the alpha's instantaneous surge of anger, a hot, suffocating wave that threatened to choke her. Her hands instinctively balled into fists, and a growl, low and involuntary, rumbled in her throat. Every eye in the meeting turned to her. The young warrior faltered, his expression shifting from bravado to confusion. The Alpha, meanwhile, shot her a sharp, warning glance. He knew she was reflecting his anger, inadvertently confirming his inner turmoil. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a chink in his otherwise impenetrable armor. Later that night, the Alpha sought her out. He stood before her den, his presence radiating a controlled frustration she felt keenly. "You must learn to control it," he said, his voice taut. "Your reactions, they undermine me. They give strength to those who seek to challenge." "Control it?" she retorted, her voice tinged with exasperation. "How do I control something that's not mine? How do I stop feeling your rage when you're seething inside?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of agitation. "You must learn to filter it, to separate yourself. I cannot afford to have my vulnerabilities broadcast to the entire pack through you." "And what about my vulnerabilities?" she shot back, stepping closer, her own, frustration mounting. "What about the constant torment of bearing your burdens? Do you think I enjoy feeling every ache, every hidden sorrow? Do you think I revel in being a living, breathing testament to your emotional struggles?" He recoiled slightly, a fleeting flicker of something akin to guilt in his eyes. "I understand it is difficult." "Difficult?" she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "It's a nightmare, and it's one you dragged me into. You talk about control, but what about your own? What about learning to manage your own emotions, Alpha? Because if you can't, then I'm forever stuck paying the price." The words hung in the air, a raw, undeniable truth. His silence was deafening. He stared at her, his expression a complex mixture of anger, frustration, and perhaps a dawning understanding. "Perhaps," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we are both learning. Perhaps this burden is forcing us both to confront parts of ourselves we would rather keep hidden." It was a surprising admission, a crack in his usual stoicism. It was a step toward shared responsibility, a recognition that the curse affected him too, albeit in a different, more subtle way. From that day forward, their interactions, while still strained at times, became more open, more honest. He would sometimes pause before a tense meeting or a difficult decision, and she would feel a subtle shift in his aura, a conscious effort to calm his own emotional landscape, to lessen the burden on her. And she, in turn, would try to practice a deeper form of discernment, focusing not on suppressing his emotions, but on understanding their source, contextualizing them, and separating them from her own reactions. The Alpha even began to confide in her, indirectly at first. He would speak aloud about his concerns regarding the pack, about the pressures of leadership, the looming threats, and she would feel the corresponding emotions through the bond. It wasn't a true conversation, but it was a form of shared processing, a release of pressure that lessened the intensity of the amplified emotional echoes she received. Their cursed link, once a source of bitter resentment, was slowly transforming into a reluctant partnership. They were bound, not just by pain, but by a shared necessity to navigate the complex landscape of their intertwined lives. The threat to his authority, though still present, was forcing them to work together, to find a way to mitigate the curse's negative impact, not just for her survival, but for the stability of the entire pack. And in this shared struggle, a grudging respect, an unspoken understanding, began to blossom, fragile but undeniably present. As the seasons turned, so too did the dynamics of their cursed bond. The Alpha, in his quiet, deliberate way, began to actively work with her to manage the emotional and physical echoes. He started to communicate, not always with words, but through conscious shifts in his mental state. If he was about to engage in a strenuous training session, she would feel a subtle mental bracing from him, a focused determination that helped her prepare for the onslaught of amplified fatigue. If he was dealing with a particularly vexing problem, she would sense a wave of concentrated thought, allowing her to mentally distance herself from the accompanying frustration. This deliberate effort from him, however small, was a revelation. It wasn't about suppressing his emotions entirely, but about channeling them, acknowledging them, and in doing so, making them less chaotic for her. She, in turn, found herself responding instinctively. When she felt the familiar prickle of a phantom pain, she would try to send back a calming presence through the bond, a quiet, almost imperceptible reassurance. It was a dance of two minds, communicating beyond words, navigating a shared, invisible landscape. One crisp autumn morning, she felt a familiar ache in her knee, amplified to a throbbing pain. She knew the alpha was on a hunting patrol, and this likely meant he had stumbled or twisted something. She braced herself, knowing the return journey would bring intensified pain. To her surprise, later that day, he appeared at her den, not alone, but with the pack's healer. His expression was neutral, but she felt a faint undercurrent of concern from him. The healer, a stoic and wise wolf, gently examined her knee, even though there was no visible injury. "The alpha mentioned a stumble during the hunt," the healer stated, her eyes assessing. "He said you might be feeling some residual effects." It was a quiet admission, a public acknowledgement of their link, something he had never done before. He wasn't just silently enduring, he was actively seeking solutions for her. She felt a surge of gratitude, profound and unexpected. The alpha, for his part, remained silent, observing the healer's work. But through the bond, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The hint of responsibility, a touch of concern, and perhaps even a flicker of something akin to care. As the days passed, these small acts of consideration, these quiet acknowledgments of their shared burden, began to chip away at the resentment she still held. She saw glimpses of the man beneath the alpha's formidable exterior, a leader burdened by immense responsibility, a protector who, despite his own pain, sought to alleviate hers. Their conversations, though still infrequent and often practical, became more open. They would discuss pack matters, not just through the emotional filter of the bond, but with actual words. She found her insights, sharpened by her unique perspective into his thoughts and feelings, were often valuable. She could sense unspoken tensions, hidden motives, and subtle shifts in alliances that he might miss. He, in turn, began to solicit her opinions, not just as a courtesy, but as a genuine seeking of her counsel. "There's a subtle discontent among the southern patrols," she might say, a gentle unease emanating from her as she felt his own suppressed worry about the border. "They feel overlooked, and there's a growing rivalry with the eastern group." He would listen, his gaze thoughtful, a faint echo of surprise in his mental presence at her accuracy. "I had sensed some friction, but not the depth of it. Your insights are illuminating." It was a grudging compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. Their working relationship deepened, evolving from one of forced tolerance to a strange, almost symbiotic partnership. He relied on her unique sense of the pack and its leader, and she, in turn, found purpose in using her cursed ability to benefit the very wolf who had inadvertently trapped her. Yet, the danger of their bond remained. The very strength of it meant that if one faltered, so too would the other. This became starkly evident during a particularly harsh winter. Food was scarce, and rival packs grew bolder, encroaching on their territory. The alpha was under immense stress, leading patrols, organizing hunts, and negotiating with neighboring territories. She felt the crushing weight of his responsibility, amplified to a point where she could barely move. His constant fatigue became her incapacitating exhaustion. His gnawing hunger became her ravenous emptiness. She was fading, growing weaker, her own physical body struggling to cope with the magnified burdens of his leadership. He noticed. He saw the shadows under her eyes, the gauntness of her face, the way she struggled to even stand. He tried to lessen his own burdens, to delegate more, to conserve his energy, but the needs of the pack were paramount. One cold, desolate night, she felt a sudden, terrifying drop in his life force. It was a cold, empty sensation, a chilling void that threatened to consume her. Her own breath hitched, her heart seizing in her chest. She gasped. A silent scream caught in her throat. She knew, with horrifying certainty, that he was in grave danger, and if he died, she would follow. The true terror of the curse, the ultimate stakes, had just become chillingly real. She had to find him. She had to ensure his survival, not just for the pack, but for her very own existence. Their reluctant partnership had just been thrust into a desperate race against time and fate. The chilling void she felt from the alpha, the sudden precipitous drop in his life force, spurred her into a desperate, frantic search. Ignoring the gnawing fatigue that weighed her down and the amplified cold that bit at her bones, she pushed herself out of her den, her mind singularly focused. She knew, with an instinct born of their cursed link, that he was somewhere near the northern border, where tensions with a rival pack had been escalating. The pack compound was quiet, most wolves huddled in their dens against the biting wind. She moved like a phantom, her senses heightened by the bond. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, a potential clue. The deeper she ventured into the forest, the more pronounced the cold emptiness became, a creeping dread that threatened to paralyze her. She could feel his fading strength, the flickering flame of his life force. Through the bond, fragmented images assaulted her. The gleam of moonlight on snow, the dark outline of unfamiliar wolves, the sharp scent of blood, his blood. A primal fear, not just her own, but amplified by his own desperate struggle, coursed through her veins. He was injured, badly. She ran, a desperate, gasping flight through the snow-laden trees. Her amplified pain served as a macabre compass, guiding her towards the source of his suffering. A sharp, burning sensation in her leg indicated a wound on his. A crushing pressure in her chest signified a blow to his ribs. Each step was agony, each breath a struggle, but the terrifying prospect of her own death spurred her onward. Finally, she broke through a thicket of pines into a small snow-covered clearing. The scene was grim. 3 large, dark-furred wolves, clearly not of their pack, were circling him. The alpha was on one knee, blood staining the pristine snow beneath him, his breathing ragged. He fought with a desperate ferocity, but he was clearly outnumbered and weakened. He had sustained deep gashes on his leg and shoulder, injuries that were reflected as searing, debilitating pains in her own body. A sudden, overwhelming wave of despair radiated from him, a chilling acceptance of his impending defeat. And through the bond, she felt it tenfold. A despair so profound it threatened to steal her very will to live. But then, another emotion surfaced. A flicker of defiance, a refusal to yield, even in the face of insurmountable odds. fueled by this surge of his indomitable spirit and her own desperate need for his survival, she acted. She didn't think, didn't plan. With a guttural cry, she launched herself into the clearing. She was smaller, less powerful than the rogue wolves, but her attack was sudden, unexpected, and born of absolute desperation. She slammed into the nearest rogue, her teeth finding purchase in its flank. The wolf yelped, surprised, and stumbled back. She heard the alpha's sharp intake of breath, a sudden jolt of surprise, and a flicker of what felt like pride through the bond. Her intervention, however brief, bought him a crucial moment. He surged to his feet, a primal roar tearing from his throat, his eyes blazing with renewed ferocity. The rogue wolves, momentarily thrown off balance, hesitated. The fight resumed, but now with a terrifying new dynamic. She fought savagely, a small, desperate whirlwind, her amplified pain momentarily forgotten in the face of their shared peril. Every time a rogue wolf landed a blow on the alpha, she felt the searing agony, but instead of crippling her, it fueled her rage, a monstrous surge of protective fury that was both hers and his. The rogues, realizing they now faced two desperate opponents, and perhaps sensing the strange, unyielding bond between them, began to falter. They exchanged wary glances, their confidence waning. Finally, with a snarl of frustration, the largest of the rogues lunged at the alpha one last time, a desperate final attempt. The alpha met the attack head-on, a fierce battle cry tearing from his throat. She felt the crushing impact, a wave of agony so profound it threatened to rip her apart. She cried out, collapsing to her knees. But through the haze of pain, she also felt the rogue's simultaneous yelp of defeat. The rogues, finally broken, turned and fled, melting into the shadows of the forest. The clearing fell silent, save for the alpha's ragged breathing and her own whimpers of pain. He stood over her, swaying slightly, his powerful frame now visibly shaking. Blood streamed from his wounds, but his eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on her. She felt his pain, still agonizing, but also something else. A profound relief, a quiet astonishment, and a deep, overwhelming surge of gratitude. "You came," he rasped, his voice hoarse, a hint of wonder in his tone. She could only nod, clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of physical agony and emotional overwhelm. The brush with death, the shared fight for survival, had stripped away all pretenses, all lingering resentments. He sank to his knees beside her, his hand reaching out, hesitantly, to cup her face. She flinched, but then leaned into his touch. His pain was still her pain, but now it was accompanied by a powerful, undeniable wave of connection, of shared vulnerability, of a bond forged in the crucible of near death. "We are truly linked," he whispered, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "More than I ever knew." The curse had brought them to the brink, but in doing so, it had also forged an unbreakable connection. The fear of death, the shared struggle for survival, had finally ripped away the last vestiges of their individual facades, revealing the profound, albeit painful, interdependence that now defined their existence. Their lives, once separate and distinct, were now irrevocably intertwined, destined to navigate the treacherous path ahead, together. The aftermath of the ambush cemented their bond in a way no shared experience had before. The alpha, usually so guarded, displayed a quiet vulnerability in her presence. The constant gnawing ache of his healing wounds, amplified for her, was a persistent reminder of his brush with death, and her frantic, desperate intervention. He spent his recovery period largely in his own den, but the unseen thread between them was thicker, more resonant than ever. She felt his discomfort, his impatience with inactivity, and the subtle, slow thrum of his healing. And sometimes she felt a profound, quiet gratitude radiating from him, a warmth that soothed her own amplified aches. She, for her part, was exhausted. The sheer physical strain of feeling his injuries tenfold, combined with the emotional toll of their near-death experience, left her drained. Yet there was a strange sense of peace within her. The resentment had largely dissipated, replaced by a quiet acceptance and even a nascent understanding. She'd seen him vulnerable, fought beside him, and felt the raw, unfiltered fear of his potential demise. It had stripped away the layers of arrogance and irritation, revealing the complex, burdened leader beneath. One afternoon, as she was resting in her den, he appeared at the entrance. He looked stronger, though still moving with a slight stiffness. He carried a small, carved wooden wolf, intricate and beautifully rendered. "For you," he said, his voice softer than usual. He placed it gently on the ground before her, his gaze unwavering. A token of gratitude and acknowledgement. She picked up the carving, her fingers tracing the smooth lines. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. It wasn't just for her intervention. It was an acknowledgement of their shared burden, of the unique link that bound them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded, then sat down on the ground opposite her, his usual posture of authority momentarily absent. He seemed to hesitate, then spoke. When I felt that despair in the clearing, a part of me thought it was over. But then you were there. Your ferocity, it was a shock, a revelation." She looked at him, surprised by his candor. "I felt your fear, your despair, but I also felt your defiance. It spurred me." He met her gaze, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his dark eyes. "This bonda, it is a curse, but perhaps it also offers something else. A different kind of strength." It was the closest he had ever come to admitting the positive aspects of their link. It was an unspoken truce, an acceptance of their intertwined fates. As he continued to heal, a new dynamic emerged in their interactions. He no longer merely tried to suppress his emotions for her sake. He actively sought to understand them, to process them, knowing that by doing so, he lessened her amplified burden. He would often come to her after particularly stressful meetings, not to confide in words, but to simply sit in her presence, allowing the bond to act as a release valve for the pressure he carried. She, in turn, would offer a quiet, calming presence, a subtle mental anchor. The pack, observing this transformation, slowly began to shift their perception. The whispers of the alpha's weakness faded, replaced by an awed respect for the unique partnership forged in the crucible of their curse. They saw how she could instinctively anticipate his needs, how he, in turn, subtly protected her from the amplified echoes of his life. They were two sides of the same coin, each indispensable to the other. Their bond wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, not yet. It was something far more primal, a deep, inescapable connection rooted in shared pain and mutual survival. Yet, within this unique intimacy, a profound understanding was blossoming. She saw beyond the alpha's stoic facade, recognizing the immense weight of Arkad. His responsibilities, the quiet sacrifices he made for the pack. He, in turn, saw her resilience, her strength in enduring a torment that would break others, and the surprising depth of her loyalty. One particularly clear night, under the full moon, they stood together on a ridge overlooking the sleeping pack. The air was cold, crisp, and clean. She felt a profound sense of peace emanating from him, a rare and welcome feeling. "The pack is strong," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Stronger now." She felt the quiet pride in his words, and a deep satisfaction settled within her own chest, amplified by his. "We are strong," she corrected softly, her gaze fixed on the shimmering lunar orb. "Together." He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers in the moonlight. For a long moment, they simply stood there. Two souls inextricably linked, bound by a curse that had become, in its own twisted way, a source of unparalleled connection. The journey ahead was still unknown, but they would face it together. Their intertwined destinies now a source of unexpected strength, a silent testament to the enduring power of a bond forged in pain, and tempered by the fragile bloom of understanding. The curse had not broken them. It had, in fact, reshaped them, creating something entirely new, something irrevocably profound. The future, once a source of dread, now held a glimmer of shared possibility, a testament to the fact that even the deepest shadows can hold unexpected light. The unexpected glimmer of peace that settled between them after the ambush, however, was not without its shadows. The fragile understanding they had forged was still susceptible to the inherent complexities of their link. While the raw, amplified pain had lessened somewhat due to the Alpha's conscious efforts, the emotional echoes remained a potent force, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes subtly disorienting. She found herself becoming intensely attuned to the nuances of his moods, not just the broad strokes of anger or sorrow, but the underlying currents, the quiet frustration of a thwarted plan, the faint flicker of disappointment at a pack member's lapse, the subtle exhaustion that seeped into him after a night of vigilance. This constant emotional feed, while informative, could also be subtly draining, blurring the lines of her own identity. She still had to consciously work to separate her own feelings from his, a continuous mental exercise that required immense canonerate. Discipline. The Alpha, too, faced new challenges. His reliance on her unique insights into the pack's emotional landscape grew. He found himself instinctively turning to her during council meetings, a subtle shift in his gaze that only she would notice, seeking confirmation or clarification of a hidden dissent she might have sensed. This quiet dependence, while strengthening their bond, also created a new kind of pressure on her. She was no longer just the cursed one. She was a vital, if unofficial, advisor to the Alpha, her cursed gift now a tool for the pack's stability. Their interactions became more frequent, often informal, occurring in quiet moments away from the prying eyes of the pack. They would walk the perimeter together, their strides falling into an easy rhythm, the silence between them filled with the unspoken communication of their bond. He would speak of pack politics, of the dangers lurking beyond their borders, of his concerns for the future, and she would offer not just her unique sensory input, but her own perspectives, her quieter, more reflective insights that often resonated with his own unspoken thoughts. One such conversation occurred under a canopy of ancient pines, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling the air. He was discussing the ongoing challenges with a particularly aggressive group of rogues on their western flank. She felt his simmering anger, a hot, agitated hum beneath his words. "Their incursions are growing bolder," he stated, his voice tight. "We cannot allow them to continue to disrespect our boundaries." "They are desperate," she offered, feeling the undercurrent of his righteous indignation but also sensing the rogue's own desperation, a gnawing hunger that drove their actions. Their territory is failing. They're seeking resources. He turned to her, his brow furrowed. That does not excuse their aggression. No, she agreed, but understanding their motives might give us more leverage. A negotiation, perhaps, rather than a full-scale confrontation. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the shadows of the forest. She felt a ripple of surprise from him. Then a reluctant consideration. His first instinct was always strength, dominance. Her suggestion offered a different path, one that acknowledged a shared vulnerability, a common struggle for survival. Negotiation? He mused, the word a foreign taste on his tongue. They are not honorable. They are hungry, she countered, feeling a faint echo of the rogue's gnawing emptiness from him. And desperate wolves are predictable. They will choose survival over pride, given the right terms. He remained silent for a long moment, contemplating her words. The amplified anger within her slowly began to subside, replaced by a thoughtful quietude. This was the strength of their bond, its peculiar alchemy, her ability to perceive emotions, and his capacity to weigh those perceptions against his own strategic mind. The Alpha eventually decided to send an envoy to the rogue pack, offering a limited share of hunting grounds in exchange for peace and an agreement to respect their borders. The negotiations were tense, protracted, but ultimately successful. The immediate threat was averted, and the pack breathed a collective sigh of relief. During the negotiations, she felt every wave of his frustration, every calculated move, every moment of triumph. But she also felt his profound relief when the agreement was finally reached, a surge of quiet satisfaction that radiated through her, amplified and warm. Their relationship wasn't without its moments of discord. There were still times when his stoicism grated on her, when his unspoken burdens became too heavy for her to bear, even with his conscious efforts. There were moments when she longed for her own autonomy, for a mind and body entirely free of his influence. The shadow of the curse, though softened, remained a constant, undeniable presence. Yet, a deep-seated respect, forged in the crucible of their shared existence, continued to grow. She had learned to appreciate his unwavering dedication to the pack, his quiet strength, and the surprising depth of his empathy for even the smallest of creatures. He, in turn, had come to rely on her, to trust her unique insights, and to perhaps, in his own way, even value her presence. The curse, once a symbol of her torment, was slowly evolving into something more complex, more nuanced. It was a bond that defied conventional definitions. A link that forced two disparate souls to navigate the treacherous landscape of power, responsibility, and shared vulnerability. It was a paradox, a burden that had become an unexpected source of strength, a shared destiny that continued to unfold, one amplified emotion, one quiet understanding at a time. The future remained uncertain, but they would face it, together, their intertwined paths now indelibly marked by the bite that had bound them. The delicate balance they had achieved, a tenuous peace within the confines of their cursed bond, was soon tested by an external threat that overshadowed any internal pack politics or rogue skirmishes. A virulent plague, an ancient sickness that preyed specifically on the wolf shifters' inherent connection to their animalistic nature, began to sweep through neighboring territories. Its symptoms were terrifying, a slow, agonizing regression into pure animalistic instinct, a loss of control, and ultimately, a painful demise. Fear rippled through their pack, amplified by the Alpha's growing apprehension, a cold dread that settled deep within her bones. He worked tirelessly, consulting with other alphas, seeking ancient remedies, and isolating any wolf who showed the slightest symptom. She felt the crushing weight of his responsibility, the desperate race against time to protect his people. The fear was so intense, so pervasive, that it made her constantly nauseous, her own mind a maelstrom of borrowed anxieties. One morning, she woke to a sudden, violent wave of nausea, followed by a searing pain in her head that mirrored her own symptoms. Then, a chilling wave of recognition washed over her. The Alpha. He was afflicted. The bond, usually a conduit for amplified sensations, became a terrifying amplifier of the plague's insidious progress. She felt the slow erosion of his higher functions, the insidious creep of primal instinct. His confusion became her disorientation, his growing rage, her uncontrollable fury. She experienced the terrifying feeling of her own human mind slipping away, replaced by raw, untamed instinct. It was a living nightmare, a mirror of his agonizing decline. She stumbled out of her den, desperate. She found him in the main hall, slumped against a wall, his eyes glazed, his muscles twitching. He was fighting it. She could feel his desperate struggle, his immense willpower pushing back against the encroaching darkness. But he was losing. "Alpha!" she cried, rushing to him. Her own body was screaming in protest, mirroring his symptoms, but she ignored it. "We need to get the healer, now!" He looked at her, his eyes clouded, a low growl rumbling in his throat. For a terrifying moment, she saw only the animal, not the man. But then, a flicker of recognition, a momentary return of his awareness, shone through. "The healer no time," he rasped, his voice distorted, his human words struggling to break through the primal haze. "It's too fast." A crushing wave of despair, his despair, washed over her. He was giving up, and if he gave up, she would be dragged down with him, succumbing to the same horrifying fate. "No!" she screamed, clutching his arm, ignoring the searing pain his touch sent through her. "You can't! You fight! We fight!" She felt his confusion, his waning will. And then, a desperate, wild idea sparked in her mind, born of pure instinct and the unique nature of their bond. If she felt his pain, if she lived his emotions, could she not also share his fight? Could she not pour her own willpower, her own conscious thought, into the fading embers of his humanity? Closing her eyes, she focused. She pictured herself as a conduit, a vessel. She concentrated every ounce of her mental energy, every shred of her own human will, and pushed it towards him through the bond. She visualized a strong, clear stream of her own consciousness flowing into his, reinforcing his fading mind. She wasn't trying to control him, but to bolster him, to lend him her own strength, her own grip on humanity. She felt the resistance, the swirling chaos of the plague within him. But she pushed harder, pouring her very essence into the fight. She felt the clash of their wills, the battle within his own mind, amplified and mirrored in hers. It was a terrifying, exhausting struggle, a mental tug-of-war against an invisible enemy. The healer, drawn by the commotion, arrived, her eyes widening in shock as she witnessed the Alpha's rapid decline and the strange, desperate tableau of the cursed one clinging to him. Alderee was also there, her ancient eyes filled with a grim understanding. "What is she doing?" the healer whispered, horrified. "She is fighting for him," Alderee murmured, her voice filled with awe. "She is sharing his burden, not just feeling it. She is trying to lend him her strength, her humanity. Hours passed. She clung to him, her body trembling, sweat plastering her hair to her face. Her own mind felt fractured, on the verge of splintering, but she refused to let go. She felt his desperate fight, his occasional surges of clarity, followed by terrifying regressions. And with every surge of his humanity, she felt a corresponding surge of hope, a desperate push against the tide of the plague. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a profound shift occurred. The terrifying regression slowed. The chaotic thoughts within him began to settle. The animalistic growls softened, replaced by ragged human breaths. The fever broke, and the glazed look in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning awareness. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and then looked at her, his eyes clear, though still clouded with exhaustion. The amplified symptoms within her own body began to subside, leaving her utterly drained but undeniably human. You saved me," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. She collapsed against him, tears of relief mingling with tears of exhaustion. "We saved us," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. The healer rushed forward, examining him with a newfound reverence. Elder Rhea approached them, her eyes shining with wisdom and a profound understanding. "The legends speak of a bond so deep it can transcend even the deepest curses," Elder Ray said, her voice soft but resonant. "A true balance. You have found it, children. Not just shared pain, but shared strength, shared essence." The plague had brought them to the brink of ultimate destruction, but in doing so, it had forced them to forge a bond stronger than any curse. They had faced death together, not just by shared pain, but by actively sharing their very essence, their humanity. The Alpha was alive, and so was she. And in the crucible of this terrifying ordeal, their forced link had transformed, irrevocably, into something sacred, something profoundly and undeniably true. The curse had not just chained them, it had, in the most profound way, liberated them, revealing the true depth of their intertwined souls. The Alpha's recovery was slow but steady, and as he regained his strength, so did she. The plague had been a crucible, and they had emerged from it irrevocably changed. The constant threat of his symptoms, now a receding memory, had forged a new depth to their bond. The amplification of his pain was still present, but it was no longer a torment. It was a constant reminder of their shared struggle, a subtle echo of their enduring connection. The respect and understanding between them had deepened into something akin to reverence. He no longer saw her as merely the unfortunate recipient of his amplified burdens, but as a direct participant in his survival, a vital extension of his own being. She, in turn, no longer viewed him as the arrogant Alpha, but as a leader who had faced his own mortality, and a companion with whom she had battled a shared existential threat. Their daily interactions transformed. The quiet moments they shared became less about managing the curse, and more about genuine companionship. They would discuss pack matters, not just as Alpha and advisor, but as partners. He relied heavily on her unique insights, trusting her intuitive understanding of the pack's emotional pulse, sensing the unspoken currents that others missed. Her suggestions, once tentatively offered, were now readily accepted and often acted upon. He started to involve her in decisions of increasing importance, inviting her to private council meetings with his most trusted lieutenants. At first, there was some surprise, even subtle resentment from a few of the older, more traditional wolves. But her contributions, always insightful and often prescient, quickly proved her worth. She could detect the subtle shifts in allegiance, the hidden anxieties, the unvoiced opinions that influenced pack dynamics. One evening, during a particularly tense discussion about resource allocation for the upcoming winter, she felt a familiar knot of anxiety in the alpha. He was struggling with a decision that would inevitably favor one sector of the pack over another. She sensed his internal conflict, his desire to be fair while also ensuring the pack's overall survival. "Perhaps," she interjected softly, drawing the attention of the council, "we should consider a temporary measure. Allocate based on immediate need, but establish a review in the spring. That way, no group feels permanently disadvantaged, and we adapt as conditions change." The alpha looked at her, a flicker of surprise, then thoughtful consideration in his eyes. He felt the ripple of agreement and relief from several council members and the faint stirring of hope within the pack through the bond. "A temporary measure," he mused aloud, then nodded. "An excellent compromise. It allows for flexibility and reassures those who feel marginalized." The council quickly agreed. Her words had cut through the tension, offering a path forward that satisfied all parties. In that moment, she felt not just his amplified relief, but a profound sense of purpose. A quiet satisfaction that stemmed from contributing meaningfully to the pack's well-being. Their personal bond, too, began to deepen beyond mere companionship. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when their hands would brush, sending a jolt through her that was not of pain, but of something warmer, something akin to electricity. His gaze would linger on her, his dark eyes holding a depth of unspoken emotion she couldn't quite decipher, but which resonated deeply within her own amplified feelings. She started to feel a different kind of amplified emotion from him, a quiet longing, a burgeoning tenderness, carefully suppressed but undeniably present. It was a strange, bewildering experience, feeling the stirrings of another's affection, magnified and reflected within her own heart. She found herself responding in kind, a subtle warmth spreading through her when his presence was near, a gentle ache of absence when he was away. The cursed bond, once a torment of shared pain, was now beginning to carry the delicate, complex emotions of nascent love. It was a terrifying prospect, opening herself to such vulnerability, especially through a link that mirrored everything tenfold, but it was also undeniably exhilarating. One night, under a sky ablaze with stars, they sat by the quiet embers of a communal fire. Long after the rest of the pack had retired, the air was cool, peaceful. She felt a profound contentment emanating from him, a deep sense of calm that settled into her own soul. "The pack thrives," he said, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "And we have faced what seemed insurmountable." She looked at him, his profile illuminated by the dying embers, a powerful, yet surprisingly gentle figure. "We have." He turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers. The unspoken emotions flowed between them, a silent current of understanding, of shared history, of a future irrevocably intertwined. She felt his heart beating, a strong, steady rhythm that echoed in her own chest, no longer an amplified burden, but a comforting presence. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a shiver through her. She felt his desire, a warm, tender ache, amplified and reflected within her. And she knew, with an undeniable certainty, that her own desire, mirrored and magnified by the bond, was equally present. "The bite," he murmured, his voice husky, "was a curse. But perhaps it was also destiny. A twisted, painful destiny that brought us to this." He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. The kiss was soft, gentle, but it ignited a fire within her that spread rapidly, amplified 1,000-fold by their cursed bond. It was a kiss of shared pain, of shared survival, and of a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected and extraordinary circumstances. The curse had chained them, tormented them, nearly destroyed them, but in its own strange, unforgiving way, it had also bound them irrevocably, forcing them to confront their deepest fears, to shed their facades, and to ultimately find a love that transcended pain, power, and even death itself. They were linked, not just in suffering, but in a profound, undeniable connection, forever bound by the bite that had started it all. Their story was far from over. It was just beginning, a testament to the enduring, transformative power of a bond forged in the crucible of a curse. Their shared kiss under the starlit sky was not an ending, but a new beginning. A profound shift in the very nature of their cursed bond. The Alpha, whose name she now instinctively knew, though it remained unspoken between them, pulled back slightly. His eyes still locked with hers. The tenderness she felt from him through their link was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the initial amplified pains and emotions that had defined their connection. This new intimacy, however, brought its own set of complexities. The curse, once a source of torment, was now a constant, unfiltered conduit for every nuance of their blossoming feelings. Every flicker of desire, every surge of affection, every moment of vulnerability he felt, she experienced tenfold. It was exhilarating, intoxicating even, but also terrifying in its intensity. There was no hiding, no emotional sanctuary. Their hearts, their very souls were laid bare to each prat. Oh! She found herself responding in kind, her own emotions mirroring and magnifying his. A quiet longing for his presence when he was away became an aching void. A simple touch of his hand, a fleeting brush of skin, sent shivers through her that resonated deep within her core. Their bond, once a source of relentless suffering, was now a powerful amplifier of love, a beautiful, terrifying force that threatened to consume them entirely. The pack, ever perceptive, began to notice the subtle shifts. The way the Alpha's gaze softened when he looked at her, the way she would unconsciously lean into his presence. There were whispers, of course, about the Alpha's cursed one and the strange, undeniable pull between them. But these whispers were no longer of fear or pity, but of a quiet wonder, of witnessing a unique love story unfold before their eyes. The elders, especially Elder Rhea, watched them with knowing smiles, seeing the ancient legends of true mates, however twisted, manifesting in an unexpected way. Their daily lives continued to be intertwined with the responsibilities of the pack. The Alpha remained dedicated to his, quote, duties, and she, in turn, continued to offer her invaluable insights, her amplified connection to the pack's emotional pulse proving vital for his leadership. But now, these duties were infused with a new, personal dimension. When he was stressed, she felt it, but now she also felt his quiet determination, his unwavering commitment to his people, and she, in turn, found herself supporting him not just out of self-preservation, but out of a deep and growing affection. One particularly grueling week saw a resurgence of rogue activity on their eastern border. The Alpha was stretched thin, leading patrols, devising strategies, and managing the rising fear within the pack. She felt his profound exhaustion, the heavy weight of his responsibilities, amplified to a point where her own body ached with sympathetic fatigue. But through it all, she also felt his unwavering resolve, his protective instincts burning fiercely, and a quiet, almost imperceptible sense of comfort he drew from her mere presence. Late one night, he returned from a patrol, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with weariness. She was waiting for him, a warm herbal tea steeped and ready. He didn't speak, but sank onto the bench beside her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt his bone-deep weariness, but also the residual adrenaline of the confrontation. Without a word, she reached out, her hand gently resting on his arm. She felt his muscles tense, then slowly relax under her touch. She closed her eyes, focusing, and sent a wave of calm, of quiet strength through the bond. It wasn't a powerful surge, but a gentle, steady current, meant to soothe his frayed nerves and offer him a sense of shared peace. He sighed, a deep, shuddering breath, and leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes closing. She felt the subtle shift within him, the easing of tension, the quiet acceptance of her comfort. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, connected not just by the curse, but by a profound, unspoken understanding. "It's easier when you're near," he murmured, his voice rough with fatigue. "The burden it lessens." Her heart swelled with a warmth that mirrored his own. "And yours lessens mine," she confessed, her voice soft. "Your strength, it helps me bear it." It was a delicate dance, this push and pull of their shared existence. The curse had forced them into an unwilling partnership, then into a desperate struggle for survival, and now into a blossoming love that defied all logic. They were bound, not by choice, but by fate, and in that binding, they had found something infinitely more profound than either could have imagined. The future held its own uncertainties, of course. The complexities of leading a pack, of navigating the delicate balance of power, of facing external threats, remained, but now they would face it together, their bond a constant, unwavering anchor. The bite that had started it all, the foolish prank that had nearly destroyed them, had, in the end, woven a tapestry of interconnectedness, a love story born of pain, forged in fire, and amplified by a curse that had ultimately become their greatest blessing. Their journey was ongoing, an unfolding narrative of two souls forever intertwined, finding solace, strength, and an extraordinary love in the most unexpected of places. The curse, far from being a limitation, had opened them to a depth of connection neither had known was possible. And as they faced the rising sun, she knew, with absolute certainty, that every pain, every joy, every challenge would be felt and conquered together. The bond, now infused with the tender complexities of nascent love, continued to deepen, revealing layers neither of them had anticipated. The Alpha, whose hidden vulnerability had been exposed by the plague, found himself increasingly reliant on her, not just for her unique insights, but for the quiet strength she offered. He began to share the weight of his leadership in a way he had never dared before, his thoughts, strategies, and anxieties flowing through their link, no longer as amplified burdens for her, but as shared understanding. She, in turn, found her own sense of purpose solidified, her life's trajectory now irrevocably intertwined with his and the pack's. One particularly harsh winter descended upon the territory, more brutal than any in living memory. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the forest in an unforgiving white. Food became scarce, and the cold crept into every den, every bone. The pack's morale plummeted, a palpable sense of despair that she felt as a constant, heavy ache in her own chest, amplified by the Alpha's deep concern. He spent endless hours organizing hunting parties, rationing supplies, and ensuring the weakest members of the pack were cared for. She felt his constant worry, the gnawing anxiety for his people, but also his unwavering determination. One biting morning, a young pup, barely old enough to walk, succumbed to the cold. The alpha was there, his powerful frame hunched over the tiny still form. She felt the searing agony of his grief, a raw, profound sorrow that ripped through her, amplified tenfold. She choked back a sob, tears streaming down her face, her own pain a pale shadow compared to the overwhelming wave of his. He buried the pup himself, his movements heavy, his silence a testament to his suffering. She felt the crushing weight of his responsibility, the agonizing truth that he could not save everyone, and the deep, personal grief he bore for each loss. Later that day, unable to bear the desolate silence emanating from him, she sought him out in his den. He sat by the dwindling fire, his shoulders slumped, his face shadowed with exhaustion and sorrow. She sat beside him, not speaking, just offering her presence. She felt his profound loneliness, the isolation of leadership, and the immense burden of grief that he felt he had to carry alone. Through the bond, she sent a wave of comfort, of shared sorrow, of unwavering support. She poured her own empathy into the link, a quiet, gentle embrace for his suffering. She felt him stiffen, then slowly relax, the tight knot of his grief loosening, just a fraction. He reached out, his hand finding hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a tight, desperate grip. It's relentless," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "The cold, the hunger, the losses. I feel every one of them." "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel it too. We feel it." He turned to her, his eyes, usually so stoic, brimming with unshed tears. For the first time, she saw the raw, exposed vulnerability of the alpha, the man beneath the legend. He leaned into her, his head resting on her shoulder, his grief a palpable weight that she bore alongside him. No longer an amplified agony, but a shared burden that, paradoxically, made it lighter. "I don't know how I'd carry it alone anymore," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Her heart ached for him. "You don't have to," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "We carry it together. This curse, it made us feel each other's pain, but it also taught us to share it, to truly share it." The winter continued its relentless assault, but their bond became a bastion against the despair. She sensed his moments of weariness and would subtly step in, offering a timely suggestion in a council meeting, or taking on a small task that would alleviate a fragment of his burden. He, in turn, became even more attuned to her well-being, ensuring she was fed, warm, and rested, knowing that her strength was intrinsically linked to his own. The pack, witnessing this profound partnership, began to draw strength from them. They saw their alpha not as an unyielding, unbreakable force, but as a leader who shared his burdens, who allowed himself to be supported, and whose connection to the cursed one was now seen as a source of unwavering strength, rather than weakness. The elders spoke of their bond as a living testament to the ancient ways, a rare occurrence where two souls were so perfectly aligned, even if forged in pain. As spring slowly began to unfurl, bringing with it the promise of new life, the alpha and she found themselves navigating a new phase of their relationship. The underlying affection had deepened into a profound love, a quiet, all-encompassing force that permeated every aspect of their shared existence. The amplified nature of their bond meant that their love, too, was experienced with an intensity that transcended ordinary human or even wolf-shifter emotions. Every touch, every glance, Every shared moment was infused with a heightened sense of connection, a profound intimacy that left no room for pretense or doubt. Yet, this intense intimacy also brought its own set of challenges. The constant emotional resonance meant there was no escape from each other's feelings, good or bad. A moment of irritation for one could become a storm of frustration for the other, amplified and raw. They had to learn to navigate these heightened emotional states, to communicate not just through words, but through conscious emotional regulation, a delicate dance of empathy and self-control. One afternoon, a minor disagreement arose between them during a discussion about pack security. The alpha, accustomed to immediate deference, became slightly impatient when she presented a different perspective. She felt his irritation, a sharp prickling sensation, magnified into a surge of annoyance that made her clench her fists. "I believe my approach is more effective," he stated, his voice firm, a subtle edge of authority creeping in. "Perhaps, Alpha," she countered, her voice tighter than she intended, feeling the amplified frustration radiating from him. "But it carries higher risks for the patrol members, and the pack's fear levels would increase." The tension in the air crackled. He felt her amplified annoyance, and a flicker of his own irritation intensified, creating a feedback loop. He saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight tremor in her hand, and recognized the magnified echo of his own initial impatience. He paused, taking a deep breath. She felt the conscious effort he made to calm himself, to release the tension. The amplified frustration within her began to dissipate, replaced by a softer, more reflective resonance. "You are right," he finally said, his voice softer. "My impatience was clouding my judgment. The safety of the patrol comes first. Your insight is valuable." She nodded, a wave of relief washing over her, amplified by his own. This was their new reality. A constant negotiation of emotions, a delicate dance of understanding and adjustment. They learned to quickly recognize the onset of a heightened emotional state in the other, and to consciously work to mitigate its impact. He would verbalize his frustrations to release the pressure, knowing she would bear the echo. She would articulate her anxieties, knowing he would absorb and process them. Their bond became a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving, constantly teaching them. It demanded complete honesty, absolute vulnerability, and an unwavering commitment to understanding and supporting each other. There was no room for unspoken resentments or buried emotions, for they would inevitably surface, amplified, and undeniable. The physical closeness between them also intensified. Touches became more frequent, more lingering. A hand resting on her lower back as they walked, his arm brushing hers during a meeting, a gentle squeeze of her shoulder when she felt overwhelmed. Each physical contact was a conduit for their amplified affection, a silent language of love that transcended words. One night, as they lay together in his den, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, she felt a profound sense of peace emanating from him. It was a deep, quiet contentment, amplified within her to a state of pure bliss. She turned to him, her eyes tracing the strong lines of his face in the dim light. I never thought this would be possible," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This bonde, it began as a curse, a torment." He smiled, a rare, soft smile that reached his eyes. "And now?" "Now," she said, leaning closer, her heart full. "It's everything. It's home." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly. She felt his love, amplified and overwhelming, a powerful surge that filled her entirely, leaving no room for doubt or fear. The curse, the bite that had started it all, had not just bound them. It had fundamentally transformed them, stripping away their individual defenses, forcing them to confront their deepest fears, and ultimately leading them to a profound, undeniable love that transcended all logic and expectation. Their journey was ongoing, an unfolding narrative of two souls forever intertwined, finding solace, strength, and an extraordinary love in the most unexpected of places. The curse, far from being a limitation, had opened them to a depth of connection neither had known was possible. And as they faced the rising sun, she knew, with absolute certainty, that every pain, every joy, every challenge would be felt and conquered together. Their story was a testament to the enduring power of connection, proving that even the most twisted of beginnings could lead to the most beautiful of ends. The pack, witnessing the profound transformation in their alpha and the cursed one, began to redefine their understanding of strength. It was no longer solely about physical prowess or unyielding authority, but about the profound emotional intelligence and unwavering connection displayed by their leaders. The alpha's decisions, infused with her empathetic insights, resonated deeper within the pack, fostering a sense of unity and trust that had been subtly lacking before. Their unique partnership became a legend in the making, whispered about around evening fires. Other packs, upon hearing tales of their bond, sent envoys, eager to learn from their unconventional strength. The alpha, accompanied by her, would meet with these visitors, their intertwined presence a silent testament to their unbreakable connection. She would often sense the underlying motives of the visiting alphas, their fear, their curiosity, their thinly veiled attempts to glean weaknesses. She would subtly convey these insights to her alpha through their bond, allowing him to navigate the diplomatic waters with unparalleled precision. One particularly significant diplomatic meeting involved a powerful, aggressive northern pack, known for their territorial ambition. Their alpha, a formidable wolf with a reputation for cunning and ruthlessness, arrived with a retinue of his warriors. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a silent challenge in every glance, every posture. She sat beside her alpha, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent anchor. Through the bond, she felt his assessment of the northern alpha, his strength, his intelligence, but also his deep-seated distrust and a hint of paranoia. She also felt the calculated bravado of the northern alpha's warriors, masking an underlying nervousness. The northern alpha began to speak, his voice deep and commanding, subtly laying claim to certain hunting grounds that bordered their territory. She felt her alpha's anger rise, a controlled but potent surge. But she also sensed his strategic restraint, his desire to avoid outright conflict. As the northern alpha spoke, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of loneliness from him, a fleeting glimpse into the isolation of his own leadership. It was quickly suppressed, but she caught it, a vulnerability he rarely showed. She subtly shifted, a gentle squeeze of her alpha's arm, sending a silent message. He is strong, but he is also isolated. Acknowledge his pride, but appeal to his shared burdens. Her alpha, attuned to her subtle cues, shifted his strategy. Instead of directly challenging the northern alpha's claims, he spoke of the mutual struggles of leadership, the constant pressures, the need for all packs to thrive, not just individually, but collectively. He spoke of the harsh winter, of the plague, of the shared vulnerability of all wolves in the face of nature's relentless forces. She felt the northern alpha's surprise, then a gradual softening of his stance. The loneliness she had sensed earlier seemed to resonate with him. He began to respond, not with aggression, but with a cautious respect, acknowledging the alpha's unique perspective. The negotiations, initially fraught with peril, took a turn towards mutual understanding. By the end of the day, an agreement was reached, not of submission, but of shared responsibility and mutual aid during times of hardship. The northern alpha departed, his initial arrogance replaced by a grudging respect, and a profound sense of curiosity about the extraordinary bond between their leaders. Walking back to their den, the alpha placed an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She felt his profound satisfaction, a quiet triumph that resonated deeply within her. "Your insights, they are invaluable," he murmured, his voice warm. "You saw what I could not. You sensed his hidden burdens, his vulnerabilities. It allowed us to find common ground, not just enforce dominance." "We are stronger together," she stated, her voice soft, her heart filled with a quiet joy that mirrored his own. "This cursed taught us how to truly see each other, and to use that sight for the pack's good." Their love deepened with each shared challenge, each silent understanding. It was a love that transcended the conventional, forged in the crucible of pain and tempered by shared responsibility. There was no pretense, no artifice, for their hearts and minds were laid bare to each other through the powerful conduit of their bond. Every moment of joy, every flicker of affection, every shared triumph was magnified, making their love an extraordinarily vivid and profound experience. They found a rhythm in their shared existence, a comfortable intimacy that allowed them to navigate both the grand challenges of leadership and the quiet moments of daily life. He would often seek her out after a long day, not necessarily to discuss pack matters, but simply to sit in her presence, allowing the quiet hum of their connection to soothe his weariness. She, in turn, found profound peace in his presence, the amplified warmth of his affection a constant comfort. Their physical connection, too, deepened with the emotional. Touches became more frequent, more natural. A silent language of reassurance and affection. A hand held, a shared embrace, a gentle caress, each touch a conduit for the magnified love that flowed between them. There were no secrets, no hidden corners of their souls, for the curse had stripped them bare, leaving them vulnerable but also profoundly connected. One evening, as the first stars began to prick the twilight sky, they stood on the highest ridge overlooking their territory, the expanse of their land stretching out before them. She leaned against his strong frame, feeling the steady beat of his heart, amplified and comforting. She felt his deep contentment, his quiet pride in the thriving pack, and a profound sense of gratitude for their shared journey. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice low, breaking the peaceful silence. "The bite? That day at the festival?" She paused, reflecting. The memories of her initial torment, the despair, the fear of death, flickered briefly. But then, stronger, clearer, came the memories of their shared battles, their hard-won understanding, and the profound love that had blossomed from the ashes of her foolish prank. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his in the deepening twilight. A gentle smile touched her lips. "I regret the pain it caused," she confessed softly. "But I don't regret where it led us. Not for a moment." He wrapped his arm tighter around her, pulling her closer. "Nor I," he murmured, his lips brushing the top of her head. "A curse that became a blessing. Our blessing." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Below them, the pack's fires flickered, tiny beacons of warmth and life in the vast wilderness. They stood there, two souls irrevocably bound, their love amplified and deepened by the very curse that had once threatened to destroy them. Their story was a living testament to the unexpected paths destiny could take, proving that even in the most painful of beginnings, the most profound and beautiful connections could be forged. The bite had started a curse, but love had woven it into an unbreakable bond, a shared destiny that would forever define them. The years that followed were a testament to the enduring strength of their unconventional bond. Their pack flourished under their dual leadership, guided by the alpha's strategic mind and her unparalleled emotional foresight. The cursed one, once a symbol of misfortune, became an integral part of the pack's identity, a living legend who embodied the strength found in vulnerability and the profound connection forged in shared hardship. Their love, constantly amplified by the curse, never waned in its intensity. It evolved, deepening with each passing season, each shared joy, each collective sorrow. The raw, overwhelming surges of early love had mellowed into a profound, steady current of affection and understanding. They learned to navigate the nuances of their constant emotional resonance, to distinguish between their own feelings and the echoes of the other, to find solace in the shared silence, and to draw strength from their combined essence. Children were born into the pack, new generations growing up under their unique leadership. The pups would often gather around them, fascinated by the tales of the alpha and the cursed one, their intertwined lives a powerful lesson in resilience, empathy, and the unexpected nature of love. She would often feel the alpha's quiet pride in their young, his deep-seated hopes for their future, amplified and echoed within her, filling her with a corresponding surge of warmth and love. Their bond became a natural part of their existence, as fundamental as breathing. There were no longer conscious efforts to filter emotions or to mitigate pain. It was an intuitive process, a seamless flow of consciousness between them. If he felt a pang of hunger, she would feel it as a suggestion, prompting her to offer him food. If she felt a fleeting moment of sadness, he would sense it and offer a quiet comfort without needing words. The alpha, for his part, continued to grow into his role, with an unwavering sense of purpose. His initial arrogance had long since been shed, replaced by a quiet wisdom and a profound humility. He leaned on her, not as a crutch, but as an irreplaceable partner, recognizing that her unique ability to perceive the emotional landscape of the pack was as vital as his own strength and strategic acumen. He no longer felt the isolation of leadership, for his burdens were always shared, his triumphs always amplified and celebrated by the one whose soul was irrevocably linked to his. She, in turn, found a fulfillment she had never imagined possible. Her life, once seemingly derailed by a foolish prank, had become a testament to the extraordinary possibilities of connection. She had embraced her role, not just as the alpha's partner, but as a guiding force within the pack, her empathetic heart a beacon for all. She found joy in the simple moments, the warmth of his hand in hers, the comfort of his presence beside her, the shared laughter over a playful pup. Every emotion, every experience was heightened, made richer by the constant, undeniable resonance of their bond. The physical effects of the curse had also softened over time. The amplified pains, while still present, were no longer debilitating. They were gentle reminders, subtle nudges that allowed her to anticipate his needs, to offer support before it was even requested. The constant emotional influx, once overwhelming, was now a harmonious symphony, a beautiful tapestry woven from two souls. Years turned into decades. Their fur grayed, their steps slowed, but their bond remained as vibrant and strong as ever. They were elders now, revered figures, their lives a living legend for their thriving pack. They had weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, and mourned losses, always together, always connected. One crisp autumn evening, as the full moon cast its silvery glow over the sleeping pack, they sat outside their den, wrapped in thick furs. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar, comforting rhythm of his heart. His breathing was soft, steady, a quiet testament to their shared peace. She felt a gentle drowsiness settle over him, a profound weariness that mirrored her own. It wasn't the exhaustion of illness or pain, but the peaceful fatigue of a long, well-lived life, a deep contentment that radiated through their bond. "It was a good life," she whispered, her voice raspy with age, feeling his quiet agreement. A good life, shared. He stood, his head resting on hers, his hand reaching for hers, intertwining their gnarled fingers. She felt his love, vast and encompassing, a gentle tide that washed over her, amplified and pure. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that her own love, mirrored and magnified, flowed back to him in equal measure. Their breaths grew softer, their hearts beating in a shared, slow rhythm. The peaceful weariness deepened, pulling them gently into the vast, unknown expanse beyond life. She felt his essence begin to subtly fade, a gentle, quiet dispersal, and her own essence began to mirror it, a seamless, peaceful transition. There was no fear, no struggle, just a profound sense of completion, of two souls finally becoming one. The curse, that fierce, unforgiving bond, had not only bound them in life, but promised to bind them in death as well. Not in pain, but in peace, in a shared journey beyond the veil. Their lives, once so disparate, had converged into a singular, beautiful narrative, a testament to the fact that destiny could be found in the most unexpected of places, and that love, even born of a curse, could transcend all boundaries, even those of life and death. Their story, the story of the Alpha and the Cursed One, became an enduring legend, whispered through generations. A powerful tale of how a bite that began a curse ultimately led to an eternal love. Their light, intertwined and amplified, continued to shine, a beacon for all who sought solace in connection and strength in shared love.